Yeah, absolutely. So New Year's resolutions, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Okay, so New Year's resolutions, I think, have a little bit of a bad rap. So when we came back into the gym at the start of this year, the slightly kind of ironic eye roll question that people would be asking, oh, do you have any New Year's resolutions? And I think it's basically got to a point where people see it as being a bit passé. And it's a really interesting one because I think a lot of the kind of things you'll maybe see in the media, in social media, things like that, is it's all very much about if you're not taking ownership of this right now, that's a bad thing. So I went away and did a little bit of reading about it, spoke to a few people about it, and it was just this idea that actually New Year's resolutions, they aren't good, they're bad. It's kind of a bit of a mixture. There's really great things about them, really instinctive human side of it. I suppose it's what you do with that New Year's resolution.
Oh dear.
Enter music. This is my fight song. Off the back of those conversations, it just made me think about it a little bit. So doing some reading on it and finding out exactly what they are. So came across a term I'd never heard before, which is this idea of things being something called a temporal landmark, which is really interesting. So reading a little bit more about that, it was this idea that all a temporal landmark is, it's a distinct event that separates the ordinary. And it's almost a way of creating chunks of our life that we can then compare and contrast ourselves to. Things like a birthday, New Year's, very distinct, obvious, well-recognized dates in the diary, where often people, what they'll do is they will reflect, where am I now in comparison to my last birthday? The next stage of that was that, as I said, it's a really kind of human thing to be able to maybe identify something that you want to change, but making changes and achieving goals, yes, they are rewarding if they are the right goals, but they're also really hard to do because it involves changing behavior, it involves work. So quite often what people maybe do around, and it's not necessarily a downside, it's once again, it kind of depends on how you manage it, but it's really interesting because you'll separate present day self and future self. And what can quite often happen is, say in December, I decided to do a kind of New Year's resolution, and I give responsibility to my future self to deal with that problem, to face that problem. Yeah, so it's that separation of present day self, future self, and good things about that, bad things about that. So I quite often use this as a tool when you're doing goal setting. It's this idea of mental contrasting. So it's this idea of, right, let's visualize what success looks like to you, and then what does that vision tell you about what it is that you want to do, what's important to you, what does it look like, and then what you'll then hopefully be able to do and go, right, okay, the contrast between today and the future shows me the difference from what I am now to what I want to become. Yeah, so is that a good or bad thing? Quite often what happens is when someone does use that temporal landmark, so New Year's Day, what often happens is they experience a real surge in motivation. So surge in motivation, self-efficacy, determination, all this sort of stuff. And that's an amazing thing to tap into when you are trying to make a change. It's just what happens if you don't also put into place some sort of structure to go with that motivation. Support those habits, yeah. So that self-efficacy, that motivation that people feel around the days following a temporal landmark like New Year's Day, where they're like, new year, new me, new year, new you. It's called the fresh start effect. And it's not just things like New Year's. Like what I have noticed is that quite often, say you want to make a change in your nutrition, quite often what you'll do, I don't know if maybe this is just me, but it's like, I'll make that change on Monday, even though it's Friday. So that's that kind of like, that's a problem for future Donnie. Present day Donnie is just going to enjoy the weekend. And that's the other interesting thing about that sort of stuff is that, and I suppose it's the potential downsides to that separation of present day self, future self, is that idea that you are abdicating responsibility to the future self. Yeah, because you have handed that responsibility over to future Gavin or future Donnie, then you feel like present day Donnie or Gavin can just relax and probably enjoy themselves. So what can quite often happen is actually you get deeper into that thing that you actually want to change. Almost like get the most out of it before you make the change. So that would be the argument. That would be the that would be, I suppose, the argument for saying there's no reason why you can't just change now. But I think it's like, rather than that being like this hard and fast rule, being like, right, people are going to do this. People are going to make resolutions, people, all that sort of stuff. Let's tap into the good stuff about it, which is that increase in self-efficacy, the increase in motivation that people experience off the back of this stuff. But then let's also try and be like, listen, that's not enough, because that will fade. So let's give you strategies, let's give you things so you can ride that wave of motivation and ride it really skillfully. So that's the kind of analogy that I thought of when I started to read about this. So I was a sports psychologist when I played rugby. Good friend of mine, Tony Westbury, works up at Napier University. Hey, Tony. And one of the things he used to say to me was, ride the wave, Donnie. So probably one of my things that I struggled with playing rugby was basically being crippled by overthinking. So he was basically just trying to get me to just go with the flow, basically. And I thought of that analogy when we were looking into this. So I suppose how I think about it is that idea of, if that wave, that motivation that you feel at the start of a new year is a little bit like a wave, it's almost like, right, how skillfully are you going to ride that wave? Because that wave's going to move you, but are you going to basically, if you ever surfed or bodyboarded or anything like that, if you're not very skillful at riding that wave, you're going to fall off very quickly. You will get picked up by the wave, but you're just going to get dumped. But if you are skillful at riding that wave, then that wave potentially is going to take you all the way into the beach. And in this little analogy, the beach is your goal. So it's that idea of, let's tap into that wave of motivation that comes with that temporal landmark, that New Year's resolution. But then let's also have skillful strategies that you implement which allow you to ride that wave really skillfully. I want to run a marathon. So what I would say to that is, amazing, okay, cool. Why a marathon? What's that mean to you? What value are you going to get from that? What does that tell you? What will that provide for you? So, and it starts to get into this idea of something called a self-concordant goal, also known as a superordinate goal. So that's the idea you hear people talk about, like things like start with why, stuff like that. So that's the idea. These superordinate goals, these self-concordant goals are goals that can be quite abstract, and they're very closely tied to your own identity, how you see yourself, as well as your values. And that goal is going to be a satisfying goal to hit if it is very much in line with who you see yourself as. And the other interesting thing about that is that if that goal is self-concordant, so if it is in line with your values, you're much more likely to hit it because you have a real reason to stick at it. So when the barriers come, which they will come, the pitfalls will come, yeah, definitely, definitely. If that goal is in tune with your values and your identity, then you're much more likely to persevere. The other thing to think about that is one as well is that idea that, did you choose that goal? Or is somebody giving it to you? Is it you should run a marathon? Or really, should I? Why? As opposed to being like, no, I want to run a marathon. So that comes back to that, okay, so what value are you getting from that? Because what quite often happens, if it's not something that you've chosen, it's not something that's intrinsic, you could run that marathon, achieve that thing, and then be like, I feel nothing, I feel empty, I don't feel any sense of accomplishment, because ultimately I wasn't doing this for me. I mean, to us, it's not language that I would use, but it's an interesting way of thinking about it, for sure. Yeah, definitely. So you're talking about maybe people have set themselves a goal at the start of January, and maybe it's now coming up for the end of the first month, and all of that enthusiasm and bright-eyed bushy tails that people maybe felt 1st of January, 2nd of January, this is fantastic, I feel brilliant, is maybe starting to wane. And that's the bit where we go, okay, so we're starting to, that wave of motivation and excitement is starting to die. What is left a goal that is really attuned to your values and your identity, something that matters to you? And also, do you have a structure in place that's actually going to help you execute this goal? Because we've probably reached a point where wanting it is probably not enough. That motivation's run out. So we want to tap into it because it's great, but we also want to have a structure in place as well.